to the different video streaming platforms. So if you want to find out what's on Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus or Amazon Prime Video or Shudder or Quibbly or Gumbo or whatever they're called, if you like to watch stuff as well as play stuff, go check that out. It's on the IGN channel. Did you know that Paramount Plus is getting 1,000 movies next month? I'm not joking. 1,000. I'm not even gonna list them all. I'm gonna go take a nap. Thank you. Good night.
Mass Effect, released in 2007, set the bar for what players expected from RPGs during the 360 era. It was entirely voice-acted, used a branching conversation system that allowed for different outcomes in each situation, and promised to have narrative ties that would last the entire trilogy. Pitched over dinner by Casey Hudson as a sci-fi RPG, he believed that it would become a mainstream phenomenon and a must-have game for the Xbox 360. Fast forward 14 years later, and we're on the precipice of seeing Mass Effect Legendary Edition release on modern-day consoles and PC to much fanfare, meaning I'd say the entire BioWare team delivered on that goal. We've been given early access to some footage that showcases dramatic updates to the original Mass Effect and a peek at how Mass Effect 2 and 3 will also be improved. But let's start with a closer look at the original, the one that needed the most care, to take a look at how it's been updated. Beginning with the combat sequence, we get our first look at the updated HUD, and yes, your weapons will still use a cooldown system and not thermal clips like in Mass Effect 2 and 3. In addition, the weapons use a different reticle, and there are no longer class-specific weapon restrictions that make certain guns unusable for certain classes. But let's talk about the textures for a second. Using AI upscaling, the new look of this garage scene on Noveria is night and day when compared to the 360. The specifics may appear subtle, but one I can point out in this scene is a much more natural, soft effect of the lighting. They're using ambient occlusion in the scene, which you can see more clearly on the boxes that emit shadows. Stepping away from combat for a moment, we also got a tour of the main hub in Noveria. This footage opens with an amazing look at the new female Shepard model as she exits the elevator. The character models looked a lot better in Mass Effect 3, and with the new character model feature, you can start Mass Effect 1 as that iconic female Shepard. The lighting and camera placement is changed here too, putting you a little bit closer to the characters as they move through the levels or down elevators. The Noveria port has been heavily reworked in Legendary Edition, and you see some small elements as you exit the elevator. Couches have cushions, and the textures on the walls and concrete floors have been reworked. In the main hallway, they've added light fixtures across the entire room and even removed large pieces of geometry that previously would break up your path. Here's what BioWare's Mac Walters had to say about why the wall was removed.
The wall and why the wall came down in Noveria, right? You'll see them probably more so throughout Mass Effect 1. They were really just meant for streaming occlusion, essentially sightlines, right? In large open spaces, which we had quite a few of in Mass Effect 1. Whatever the game has to render is going to start to hit your performance. So when you have a wall there, when you come off the elevator, it just means that you don't have to show the whole level and load the whole level and have everything on screen as soon as you get off the elevator. And so the art team wanted to try taking it out, and it worked great, and I think it looks awesome.
When you reach the garage with the Mako inside, you'll also notice an additional lighting in the room and objects that have been completely remodeled. Even on the Mako, there's texture and dirt on the tires, and it looks a lot more rugged and used. Looking at the provided Mako footage is really interesting to me because this is one of the key areas of the original that needed work. The original Mako was floaty, bouncy, and while I can't comment on how the Mako controls now, as I haven't played it yet, we did get to see two driving sections. The first is directly after you leave the Noveria port, and again the new textures on the ice-covered mountain are immediately visible, but if you watch the Mako drive, you might notice some changes, like a boost feature. Here's BioWare producer Renata Cronin on how the Mako changed.
It is so much better now. We've made it better in that it handles better, it targets better. You know, we changed up the reticle when you're shooting with the Mako now so that it actually hits where you're aiming, which is very awesome, because it didn't used to do that before. You know, we've added boosters to it as well. We're still in the process of sort of tweaking it a little bit, so this clip right here is not necessarily representative of the end product, but it's got all the major improvements that we wanted. Now we're just playing around with, you know, how weighty does it feel, because it's still a little bit floaty, as you can see, but now it feels more, you know, like you're driving a tank and not, you know, the car that floats for some reason.
Later, we also got a peek at a Thresher Maw fight on Antibar that shows another gameplay addition. Yes, the Thresher Maw still moves around, but now with a trail so you have a clearer picture of where they're headed with each movement. That should result in fewer instant deaths. There's also a new sensory tentacle phase to the encounter, where you need to avoid the maw and the tentacles as you battle. At the finale, you can notice the plumes of smoke have a lot more body to them also. I'm a little more hopeful about the Mako after seeing this footage. All of this is on top of massively decreased loading times provided by hardware advances like faster hard drives. This is a side-by-side shot of the original and Legendary Edition. As you can see, you can choose to instantly be at your destination, while in the original, you would be waiting for a significant period of time. And two smaller but important systems we got to look at were the inventory system and character creator. So the inventory system has been reworked, and it seems you can more easily sort, dismantle, and compare your gear for you and your squad mates. This also applies to the store, which looks to give you different view options depending on what you're looking to buy and sell. The character creator, which allows you to create a character before you begin playing any of the games in the trilogy, is also drastically updated. The original benefits the most from this, and I've gone back to see how close I can get the 2007 character models to the new models, but the options just aren't comparable. There are more hairstyles, more makeup options, more skin tone options, and you're really allowed to go all out. Looking at Mass Effect 2, we didn't see nearly as much, but there's a lot more detail in what we did see than I expected. The outfits have been reworked, meaning no more orange suits, and all of the outfits available in Mass Effect 3 are now available in Mass Effect 2. And while I don't have any fish at this point in my Mass Effect 2 save, what you should really be looking at is in the new game, as there are improved reflections on the tank itself.
So what we're doing there is instead of doing a screen space reflection, we're doing what's called a render to texture. So you're basically just re-rendering the world in a texture in that space. And so you have to be very careful where you can use them, because you can imagine a scenario where if you use it in the wrong space, you're basically paying twice for your rendering, right?
The rest of the Normandy benefits tremendously from the facelift. In Lair of the Shadow Broker, the lighting has changed, as you can see in the distance, but most changes in this expansion are subtle. The 4K assets are very apparent, and they may have added a depth of field effect, which I noticed on the ship. In addition, there are a few moments where the new lighting reflects off of surfaces, like at the end of this footage when the array is retracted. Here's BioWare producer Brennan Holmes with a few thoughts.
Mostly it's just graphical improvements here, right? So like on the gameplay side, it's mostly just been bug fixes for Mass 2. We're pretty happy with kind of where Mass 2 is at, but you can see sort of improved visual effects here. Lighting's a lot better. I think I could probably talk a little bit about the DLC stuff as well in here. So it's now embedded in various stores, or you can get it through upgrades in the Normandy. Like DLC is always the fun time when it's, you know, you got all your tools and everything and everyone just kind of goes crazy. And I remember them pitching this concept around like, yeah, let's have a fight on the outside of the ship, and it'll be like, you know, in the lightning storm with all this stuff going on. And that was just a really cool concept.
And last but certainly not least is Mass Effect 3, which does benefit from all the texture updates, character model updates, and anti-aliasing improvements. But because it was so polished at launch, I asked BioWare what players can expect for the third entry in the series. Here's what Mac Walters had to say about this already stellar entry.
I think it's in the sort of global improvements where you're going to feel it in ME3. The interesting thing there is we knew that Mass Effect 1 would need the most work, but we also wanted to leave everything on the table of if there were things that we really wanted to improve there. And the more we sort of dug into 3, we felt like, look, we are more at risk of taking something that was pretty damn good and making it worse, or just making a lateral move where it's different, but is it actually better? And a lot of times we just said, yeah, no, it's fine. You know, gameplay, everything is good the way it is. There were bugs, and we couldn't fix all of them, but we fixed a lot of them, sort of thing. And we would find them all throughout all 3 games, sort of thing. So I think that's another thing. And you probably would go, oh yeah, this feels less buggy. But if you were to play them side by side, you'd be like, oh, okay, yes, I see what you did there. Putting them all together with all of the DLC, including things like, you know, armor packs and alternate appearances and stuff like that. And when you get all of that content together, and there is less of that sort of what I would call friction in Mass Effect 1 that kind of is like, oh boy, I like it, but it's really making me work for it. It does feel like a whole experience. It together feels very obviously modernized, but it just feels more than the sum of its parts.
I was already sold on playing through the series once more, and the Legendary Edition gives me the perfect opportunity. The first Mass Effect might just be my favorite game ever made because of the promise of biotic-powered gameplay, stellar storytelling unlike anything I had seen at the time, and space exploration to unique planets. I look forward to jumping back in this May. A special thank you to BioWare for providing the commentary today and for making this amazing trilogy. It is honestly a game that will always be special to me, and I'm so happy to see the amount of care going into this remaster. I'll be doing a full performance review on the final code, so keep an eye out to see how it runs on each platform. In the meantime, if you're looking for performance reviews, keep an eye on IGN Games, as myself and my colleague Michael release new episodes each week, so be sure to subscribe for more videos like this. And a personal note from me to you, thank you for watching. I just love making this series. For more on all things gaming, we've got you covered at IGN.
The guerrilla fantasy of building a revolution from scratch has been a staple of the Far Cry games, and although Far Cry 6 looks to carry on in that tradition, there's plenty of newness here too. During my hands-off preview and interview with lead designer David Gravel, I was impressed with the fresh systems the team has baked into the latest game. For a series with Far Cry's pedigree and built-in player base, they took bigger swings than they strictly needed to, from tweaking the game's outpost system to introducing the possibility of Hitman-like stealth to a wild array of cobbled-together weapons that will definitely get more into. Above all else, the game aims to put more options at your disposal than ever before. In Far Cry 6, you'll team up with a band of revolutionaries calling themselves Libertad, working to overthrow the fascist regime of El Presidente Anton Castillo, and free a Caribbean island state and Cuba-like called Yara. It's through Libertad that players learn the art of resolver, a guerrilla concept of using every resource at your disposal. The developers weren't afraid to run with that idea, to the point of sometimes taking things a little over the top, and I mean that in a good way. By scrapping together various items, you'll unlock weapons like El Pequeño, a massive minigun powered by a motorcycle engine, or a gun rigged out of an old portable CD player that blasts the Macarena while you down baddies. And let's talk Supremos, customizable super weapons you deploy from a backpack. At the preview session, they mostly showed the one that fires a barrage of rockets in all directions when you're desperate, but the game will naturally feature a number of different Supremos, including some that support a stealthy playstyle. And stealth has a new meaning in Far Cry 6 as well. There's a holstering system this time around, and in-game checkpoints the player can talk, bribe, or shoot their way through. It's now a legitimate option to blend in and lay low. Until you don't. Once the S hits the F, you'll be able to make your getaway in a slew of new ways. You could take a guerrilla path, one of Libertad's hidden corridors through the dense jungle, hop into one of your customizable rides complete with jets coming out of the exhaust, or mount your horse and disappear into the hills. Speaking of horses, Far Cry 6 seems to have taken a page out of Red Dead 2's book, adding camp activities to the bases you unlock and develop, giving players more of a reason to hang out at HQ. Animal companions are also back, with at least 2 spotted in preview footage. There's Guapo, an alligator with a taste for man flesh.
Good grog.
and Chorizo, an adorable little doggy used to distract enemies during stealth runs. We were also promised that FND bases, what this game calls outposts, have been varied in an attempt to refresh the time-honored Ubisoft tradition of killing some dudes and changing the color of that part of the map. That said, we didn't get to see a base takeover in action, so how much these tweaks really alter remains to be seen. But it's clear that the Far Cry 6 team have taken some risks with the formula, while maintaining the core gameplay elements they've refined over the years. Yara's unique mashup of Far Cry's standard jungle environments and an aging Comunista city-state is already a bold move, and like the Yarans themselves, the dev team seem to have taken that momentum and tried their best to utilize every part of the animal. We'll see if the borderline zany combat clashes with what seems to be the fairly serious tone of the storyline, but ultimately, I'm excited to see such a well-worn franchise trying out a few new maneuvers, and I definitely left the preview session more excited for Far Cry 6. David Gravel also led the Far Cry Primal team, so he's no stranger to unique entries in the series. It looks like he's bringing the same sort of originality to this game, beefed up with the systems introduced in 5 and plenty of new ones to boot. Hopefully, it all comes together and makes for a wild, dictator-deposing ride. For more on the world of Yara, the complete written version of this preview, and everything Far Cry 6, hit up IGN.
Good boy.
I never knew so many people lived around here. Get to the center and you'll be fine. Need to reload.
Need ammo.
What have we here?
Need that.
"12 years ago, a small development team owned by Valve known as Valve South dropped a little game called Left 4 Dead, a zombie-themed co-op first-person shooter that pit 4 players against a zombie horde and forced them to look out for the group as opposed to just looking out for the individual if they hope to survive. This helped give birth to a whole new subgenre of co-op survival first-person shooters. And while Valve continued the legacy with Left 4 Dead 2, the original developers of Left 4 Dead, now reformed as Turtle Rock Studios, had not returned to the genre that they helped pioneer. That changes with Back 4 Blood, an appropriately titled 4-player zombie-themed co-op survival shooter that goes into closed alpha testing starting today. And if my early impressions are anything to go off of, it's good to have Turtle Rock back where they belong. So much of Back 4 Blood is directly inspired by Left 4 Dead that I think it's actually important to lead off with the areas in which it tries to be different. And nowhere is that more apparent than in its deck building system. In Back 4 Blood, you actually build a deck of cards that you take in with you to each level. These cards are broken into 4 categories: Reflex, Discipline, Brawn, and Fortune. Reflex cards typically focus on granting bonuses to speed or stamina. Discipline cards are all about efficiency, so they offer buffs that give better accuracy, better healing, more ammo, and so on. Brawn cards buff your health, damage, and resistances. And finally, Fortune cards focus on cards that give you a % chance of something happening, along with other general utility-focused boons, like the ability to have unlimited ammo on your secondary weapon, or being able to shoot while sprinting. You select 15 of these cards to build your deck, and at the beginning of every level, you'll draw 3 and pick 1 card 4 times. And those 4 cards that you choose will be your starting set of active buffs and boons that you'll take with you into the first part of the level. Every time you hit a safe room and move on to the next act, you'll be able to add another active card into the mix. On the flip side of that though are the corruption cards, played by the game's AI director. Each level begins with a selection of corruption cards that inform the players of what enemies and obstacles they can expect to face. Just like how you're able to add new active cards at the beginning of every new act, there are also new corruption cards that are added that will throw a new curveball at you. Whether it be fog that makes it harder to see faraway threats, more zombie hordes, a giant ogre that you have to fight right at the start of the act, and so on. The limited nature of the alpha prevented me from really seeing the depth of the deck system, since there's only really 1 level and a relatively small selection of corruption cards that can change up how the level is played, but the idea seems really promising. especially the interplay between being able to see what corruption cards are coming up and then being able to plan out with your team what active cards you want to bring in into the next act as a way to prepare. It adds another layer of teamwork and coordination since you have to ensure that you're not doubling up on cards and have all your bases covered. Another big change to the formula is the addition of a mini shop at the beginning of each new act. Instead of being gifted with new weapons and items at a safe house, instead you're given the opportunity to choose what you want to outfit yourself with before moving on. You do this with a resource called copper, which you can find out in the levels themselves in scarce amounts. This is actually a pretty big change since you no longer find any sort of health or item pickups in safe rooms. It's up to you to purchase them all for yourself, and if you don't have the 500 copper to afford a first aid kit, you're gonna have to make the tough decision of whether you want to save that copper for the next act, or use what you have to load up on ammo, grenades, or whatever else you can afford. Everything else is pretty much as you would expect of a co-op zombie survival shooter developed by the team that essentially brought the genre into existence. You'll need to stick together with your team since there are special zombies that can incapacitate and eventually kill you if you're not assisted by a teammate. Wretches behave almost identically to boomers and will explode in a burst of bile that can attract the horde. Hawkers spit loogies at you that can slow you down and potentially lock you in place. And snitches will creep around until they're startled, at which point they'll alert the horde if not killed fast enough. And then there are the giant zombies like the ogre, which seem nearly indestructible and force my team to turn tail and run if we wanted to live to fight another day. Likewise, the one level that we got to play was also very reminiscent of Left 4 Dead in terms of its structure and objectives. In one part, we had to hold strong against a bunch of zombies while a loud gravel filler dropped enough rocks to give us a ramp to scurry up to climb over a wall, and in another, we had to blast away a propane tank and then book it across a collapsed bridge in order to escape the pursuing zombie horde attracted by the noise. And then there's also some interesting set pieces that felt completely new. Being forced to contend with a giant ogre while also trying to find a way through a cluttered tunnel was all sorts of stressful in the best kind of way. And having to split up the team to plant 2 bombs on a cruise liner while 2 others hung back and provided cover with mounted turrets was a nice climatic way to cap off the level. It's also worth mentioning that despite going through the campaign 3 times, no 2 runs ever felt the same. Obviously, the card system does a lot of that heavy lifting by changing things up every act, but on a base level, there's a ton of randomization at play in terms of enemy and item placements. Certain rooms that were completely empty on one run would be chock full of zombies on another. Doors that were once completely safe to open might now have an alarm that triggers the horde if you carelessly open them. There's just a ton of stuff happening under the hood to ensure that these levels are as replayable as they can be. Overall, my first experience with Back 4 Blood felt like just the right balance between old and familiar and new and fresh. Turtle Rock obviously knows this genre inside and out, and the ways in which they're emphasizing player choice through deck customization and vendors at the end of every act feels like a smart shift in direction that still stays true to its roots. Thanks for watching, and for more Back 4 Blood, keep it here on IGN.
From Disney heroes like Iron Man and Mickey Mouse, to spiky-haired soldiers with buster swords and uncomfortably long-limbed creepy hat creatures, few publishers have as varied a portfolio to show off as Square Enix. Square had quite the wild 12 months, with long-awaited and long-delayed games finally seeing the light. Let's take a look back, and content warning, I hope you aren't already sick of the words Final Fantasy, because you may be after we've finished here. First though, I'm going to cheat. Let's talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake, which technically did come out over 12 months ago now, but it just doesn't feel right to talk about Square's year without it. Not only was the long-awaited RPG a critical success, but it went a long way towards ensuring Square was a profitable company in 2020. In fact, it did so well that the company's releasing it again this month as Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, complete with PS5 improvements and new story content centered around everyone's favourite materia thief, Yuffie. But what about the next full part of that remake? With no word on when to expect it, maybe a reveal is an outside bet for what we could see at this E3 showcase. There's plenty more Final Fantasy VII to tide us over until then though, with both the First Soldier and Ever Crisis recently revealed. The former, a mobile battle royale game, and the latter another, yes really, remake of Final Fantasy VII, this time reverting back to its traditional turn-based combat. Is that enough Final Fantasy for you? Well, Square certainly doesn't doesn't think so.
Isn't that what you want?
The past 12 months has seen the continued resurgence of Final Fantasy XIV Online, with more players joining the MMO than ever, an upgraded version released, plus the announcement of the Endwalker expansion coming later in 2021 that will take players to the moon. Insert, that wizard came from the moon joke here. Yes, we are almost halfway through this thing, but there's still more Final Fantasy to talk about. I did warn you. Revealed at September's PlayStation 5 event, Final Fantasy XVI looks to be bringing the series back to its more medieval fantasy roots. With little known apart from some backstory about the game's fictional setting of Valisthea, there's plenty more we'd love to find out, and this year's E3 looks like the perfect place to do that. And now for something completely different. Last summer saw the long-awaited arrival of Marvel's Avengers, which really did turn out to be a game of two halves. Crystal Dynamics' interpretations of beloved superheroes and the single-player campaign that introduced us to them was a fun, action-packed 6 to 8 hours. Sadly, its post-game, gear-chasing online component didn't really live up to billing. It's been a rocky few months since launch for Avengers, with a dwindling player base and lack of content, two major issues for any live service game. There is a potential saviour on the horizon though, in the form of Black Panther. The War for Wakanda expansion is set to drop later this year, which needs to give players enough reason to flood back in order to steady the ship. Square does at least have form here. It more than made up for a troubled start to Final Fantasy XIV's life. Let's hope the same attitude is applied here. It's not all been doom and gloom. People Can Fly's looter-shooter Outriders hit the spot for many thanks to its power trip combat and addictive gear loop. People Can Fly's previously teased big expansions that will add to Outriders' story, so that's something to keep an eye out for this E3. Near Replicant version 1.2247448713 ... showed off more unique delights from the mind of Yoko Taro with this upgraded version of the Nier Automata prequel. Bravely Default 2 gave us a beautiful RPG to play on the Nintendo Switch, and rhythm action spin-off Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory hit all the nostalgic notes it needed to. And then there was Balan Wonderworld. Maybe less said about that one the better. So what can we expect from Square Enix soon? We know that Life is Strange True Colors is due to come out in September, and while we've got a decent look at it recently, a reveal of this entry's spin on the series' gameplay seems like something we'll see soon. Neo, The World Ends With You, the long-awaited sequel to the 2007 action RPG The World Ends With You, is arriving as soon as July. Plus Babylon's Fall, the painterly looking epic full of trademark Platinum Games action that we've heard pretty much nothing about since this time last year. Surely it must be time to see more. Then there are the games currently scheduled for 2022. Project Athia was recently retitled as Forspoken, another game we know very little about apart from a post-apocalyptic setting and an abundance of dragons. Then there's Project Triangle Strategy, the spiritual successor to Octopath Traveler that hasn't even been given a proper title yet, but has received a full playable proof of concept demo. These are both games we'd love to know more about, but wouldn't be surprised if we don't hear anything for a while yet. So that's everything we know is going on in the world of Square Enix, but what about the reveals we can only guess at right now? It's always fun to speculate, right? So let's have a go at it. It's been a couple of years now since we've heard what Lara Croft is up to. Has the time come for Tomb Raider to make a comeback at this E3? Yoko Taro has confirmed he's begun work on a new game that he, quote, has no idea how to explain or sell. Might be a bit of a long shot to see it right now, but you never do know with him. There's also Deus Ex and Thief, franchises with passionate fan bases who would surely love to see more. The truth is, there's no way of knowing until Square shares all with the world this summer, although surely they don't have yet another Final Fantasy game to announce just yet. Surely. One thing is for certain though, very few publishers are able to match the variety that Square Enix offers on a yearly basis, and you can more or less guarantee that that will continue.
The PS5 and Xbox Series X have only been available for 6 months, but already the newest generation of consoles has been a busy one. From big exclusives to console updates and problems to much more, PlayStation and Xbox's newest consoles are off to a fascinating start. How have they stacked up so far, and has much changed since launch day? Well, IGN's Jonathan Dornbush and Ryan McCaffrey are here to answer just that, starting things off with a look at next-gen exclusives that have launched in the last few months.
So I'd say it's been pretty quiet across the board for next-gen games since both of these consoles launched last November, but at least on Sony's side, I think like with launch day, they've been doing a little better than Xbox on the exclusive games front. We've gotten Destruction All-Stars, which launched in February, and while it definitely had a bit of a light launch, they've been adding to it and improving it and definitely supporting it since that launch day. And then of course in April, we got Returnal from Housemarque, and though there have been a lot of talk about whether or not it should have some save states in it, it definitely showed that Housemarque can make a pretty impressive third-person action game that really takes advantage of what the PS5 is doing and things like the DualSense and 3D audio. It's a really nice mix of showing off what a next-gen game can be.
Sadly, still, big system-selling games remain the Achilles heel for Microsoft. We're 6 months in, and there is exactly one game that is completely exclusive to the next-gen Xbox, meaning not available on PlayStation, not available on Xbox One. That game's The Medium. And, hey, it's a good game, but it's not exactly, pumping as much next-gen iron in the gym as, say, Returnal is or Demon's Souls. But still, first-party reinforcements are coming for Microsoft, and the good news is, once they finally do arrive, it's probably never gonna stop again. I mean, they bought Bethesda after all. It's a lot of reinforcements. They are gonna kick it off. They got this year. So Microsoft Flight Simulator, which looks like it's gonna be a next-gen only release on console. And then of course, Halo Infinite in the fall. On the Bethesda side, we're still not quite sure what's gonna happen with Starfield. Is it gonna be exclusive? Is there some sort of deal there with Sony like there was with Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo? But if indeed Starfield is exclusive, that is going to be the ace of Microsoft's sleeve. You've got a new Todd Howard game that could be exclusive to Xbox. But Jonathan, one area where Microsoft obviously wins by a one-punch TKO, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out style, is game subscription services. Xbox Game Pass is so good, my friend, that it has actually stolen one of your exclusives. MLB The Show is on Game Pass on Xbox, and it used to be, of course, a complete and total Sony exclusive. So that's awesome. Other cool stuff recently, you've got the previously Switch exclusive Octopath Traveler, Destiny 2, more. It just keeps coming. All that stuff has helped keep us entertained while we're still waiting on the big exclusives on the Microsoft side. And even better, xCloud is now rolling out to iOS devices, to Apple stuff, so that pretty soon, anybody with a smartphone, which is basically everyone, that has a Game Pass Ultimate subscription is going to be able to play their games not only on their console, but from anywhere through their phone at no extra cost for Game Pass Ultimate subscribers. That's just a totally impossible to ignore force in the entire games industry when you take all of that as a whole. Now, if only games with gold didn't suck now, but I can't really complain.
It is definitely a strange time to say a PlayStation-developed game costs more on PlayStation than on Xbox if you have subscription services on both. It is a very strange place to be, and it's of course, you're completely right. You can't compare what PlayStation's offering to Game Pass. Just nothing stacks up. But at least in a vacuum, thinking of what PlayStation players have been dealing with, things have been largely the same getting into the PS5 generation, but at the very least, I'd say PlayStation Plus's games lineup each month has been a lot better. Definitely when they pared down the lineup of games on PS Plus from 6 down to 2, they didn't really find a way to up the value there or, keep the value the same, and for a while, PS Plus kind of felt like a waste with those games. But thankfully, since the launch of the PS5, we've gotten almost a brand new PlayStation 5 game every month on PS Plus as part of that lineup. Stuff like Destruction All-Stars, Bugsnax, Oddworld Soulstorm, and Maquette. Obviously, again, it does not compare to the game after game that is coming to Game Pass, but at least taken for what PS Plus was, it's nice to see them adding a little bit of value. Of course, probably the closest thing to Game Pass that PlayStation actually does offer is PlayStation Now, but they really haven't brought that service into the generation of the PS5. You can play it on PS5, but they don't allow PlayStation 5 games yet to be a part of the service, and this really came to a head when they added Borderlands 3 and Marvel's Avengers to PlayStation Now, but only the PS4 versions. It's strange, especially to be in a place where there is a subscription service that does have a library of games and does span genres that PlayStation could really be bolstering, but it just doesn't match up to what Game Pass offers, and it's becoming painfully more clear as the months go on. Now, on the peripheral side, talking about things being a little bit the same as what we've gotten before, the PlayStation 5 launched with a decent amount of peripheral support, like a pretty good charging station that was kind of in the look and feel of the PS5's new, very ostentatious design. We got the Pulse 3D headset that takes a really great advantage of the built-in 3D audio of the PS5 and is really affordable, especially compared to some other high-end headphones, and, you know, a few things like that, including the media remote, the one peripheral we've all been trying to actually get our hands on. And while we only had the single option for the DualSense controller at launch, luckily PlayStation has revealed that we are getting 2 new colors to add to the DualSense lineup. Those include Cosmic Red, which is a red and black colorway, as well as a Midnight Black colorway, which is entirely black and aligned a little bit more with past PlayStation controllers at launch. So those are 2 options that we know of right now, and Sony definitely loves to introduce new colors as generations go on, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is just the start. We haven't quite been able to get any sense of what's to come other than some PlayStation VR new controllers that'll be on the horizon, but that is way down the line. At the very least, third-party headsets are compatible with the PlayStation 5, so if you're not a fan of the Pulse headset but do want to take advantage of 3D audio, there are some other options for you. Unfortunately, I think the biggest thing when it comes to PS5 and peripherals is an advantage the PlayStation is supposed to have over Xbox but just hasn't happened yet, and that is a more accessible opportunity to get expandable storage. PlayStation has said the PS5 will be compatible with third-party drives that, as long as they match the speeds of the internal SSD, players will be able to expand that internal storage. But we don't have information about what drives those will be, from what companies, when that will be incorporated into the PlayStation 5. We're just kind of left waiting, and that's really a big problem when there are only 667 gigs of available data on the PS5 at launch. That's maybe 2 Call of Duties these days. It really doesn't stack up to being much in the long run. And so that's already a problem we're getting to 6 months in, of a lot of people having to play Tetris with their game files basically on their hard drive. So hopefully that gets resolved soon, and I do think that will be an advantage the PS5 will have over Xbox, but as of right now, it really isn't.
Yeah, for now, Microsoft's got their 1 terabyte storage card. I've got one in there. In fact, I'm already onto it because these big games of this new generation take up a lot of space. So it's good to have, even if it's expensive. Now, since launch, though, Microsoft has added the new Xbox wireless headset, which is roughly an analog to the Pulse 3D headset for Sony. I really like it a lot. It's, I think, for $100, which is what it cost, I think you get a lot for your money. It sounds good. I like the minimalist design. And what I really like is that it can be paired with your smartphone at the same time, or any Bluetooth device, and so you can actually be chatting on Discord with your friends while also playing an Xbox game and getting the audio from your Xbox at the same time, which is pretty cool. Microsoft removed the optical port from the Xbox Series X, just like Sony did with the PS5, so we kind of needed this. It was a little bit of a bummer it wasn't there at launch, but now there is this good option, so that's really good. Plus, I want to give a special shout out to Microsoft for pumping out a whole bunch of cool new colors since launch for their controllers. I've got the Pulse Red one right here. It's nice to have something besides just the default black, so I appreciate them for that. But Jonathan, controller colors aren't the only things being updated, the consoles are too. Now on the Xbox side, the Series X actually hasn't really had any major updates because it hasn't needed them. Pretty much all the functionality that was needed was right there on day one, which is great, but Microsoft still added some good stuff. Most notably, Quick Resume has been improved, and there's a new optional suspend mode that can help speed up your game downloads, which, as we talked about, these games are huge, so being able to speed those up is always appreciated. And then probably the coolest one of all is FPS Boost, the backwards compatibility team continuing to crush it at Microsoft. There are now almost 100, as we record this, almost 100 backward compatible games that are boosted up to either 60 frames per second if they were originally 30, and some games even go up to 120 frames per second, like Titanfall 2, which is one of the best games of the last 5-10 years, which rocks. We've also seen Microsoft drop the Xbox Live subscription requirement for over 50 free-to-play games, which I do admit, that's more of a course correction than a welcome new addition, but still great.
Yeah, it's always good to see advancement like that. That was definitely something that happened with PlayStation finally allowing crossplay last generation. I very much understand. Yeah, the PlayStation is in a very different place because whereas Xbox sort of unified its UI across generations and made everything very familiar for jumping into the Series X, PlayStation opted to do a brand new user interface. And while it's certainly cool to have a new nice and shiny UI to look at launch, that means some new problems come up that maybe PlayStation had fixed on the PS4 even years ago. So we're in a bit of a strange place, but we did thankfully get our first really big PS5 major software update in April, I believe it was, and with that came a few important and needed updates, such as allowing support for 120 hertz displays, and finally the ability to store PS5 games on USB expanded storage, You can't still play it off of that, but at least you can actually put PS5 games somewhere other than the internal SSD. And there were a few other added social and interface features that really helped improve things that people have been having issues with since launch. But that said, even with that update, there are still a lot of things fans are asking for. I think, especially after Returnal, we're seeing a lot of ask for some sort of quick resume analogous feature to come to PlayStation. There have been things like wanting variable refresh rate to come, the expandable storage issues I mentioned before, and of course even just small things that have popped up since launch, like people are pretty unhappy with the way trophies are presented on PlayStation 5 because it's clunkier than they were on PS4, and it didn't need to be. So there's definitely some work that's going to have to go into the PS5's UI in the months to come. And so it's been really great to see PlayStation addressing things already with an update like that one in April and some smaller performance updates, both for the system and the DualSense since the PlayStation 5 launched in November. But that said, this whole span since that launch hasn't exactly been the smoothest for the PS5. Now, thankfully, there hasn't been anything that is as ubiquitous or widespread as the Red Ring of Death from the Xbox 360 era, but pretty much since launch day, there was sort of a whack-a-mole situation going on where a new PS5 issue seemed to crop up every few days, and so it's been hard to say what are the most proliferated issues that players have been having, how much of the player base actually saw these, but definitely one of the ones that we've seen stick around is DualSense controller drift. We've definitely seen some stick drift there that PlayStation is now facing a class action lawsuit because of, very similarly to Nintendo with the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con drift. That said, there have been a few other issues, such as rest mode bugs and occasionally downloading the PS4 version of the game when you wanted the PS5 version, but thankfully, again, nothing has been catastrophic across the board, but it's been a sort of strange, what's that new issue I'm hearing about today?
On the Xbox side here, Series X owners complaining here and there of controller drift again and random disconnects. But other than that, really, the console's been pretty much working as designed. It is quiet, it is cool, it is powerful. There haven't been any major OS issues, crashes, any other real problems of note that I've seen out in the community. Basically, I would say it's been pretty smooth sailing on the Xbox side. In fact, probably the best launch Microsoft could have possibly hoped for on the hardware side, outside of the very obvious and very frustrating and sadly very ongoing supply issues.
And there you have it. The first 6 months of the newest console generation are behind us. Of course, there is plenty more ahead, and we'll be covering all the latest news, releases, and more on IGN as well as on our weekly show, Next Gen Console Watch. Be sure to tune in, follow along with us as the journey of the PS5 and Xbox Series X continues, and keep it locked to IGN.
I doubt you could even imagine it. commanded the stars, giving life its fullest brilliance. The Elden Ring. Oh, Elden Ring. Shattered by someone or something. Don't tell me you don't see it. Look up at the sky. It burns. The world is filled with stories of legendary heroes and treacherous villains, of fantastical creatures and wondrous places where nature and magic live in perfect harmony. Not all stories have happy endings. But yours has yet to be written.
Hello, I'm Alan Lewis, Vice President of Corporate Communications and Public Affairs for Take-Two Interactive. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to Virtual E3 2021. Take-Two, like many organizations, is deeply committed to and actively involved in numerous initiatives to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion within our society and industry, affecting meaningful, sustainable change is a continuous process, and there is no one solution that can achieve that goal. We believe that to enact change, especially for those in underserved and underrepresented communities, there needs to be a continuum of activism and engagement with educational programs serving as its core foundation. Beginning with children in elementary school, we have the ability to light a spark of creativity, intellectual curiosity, and wonder that can last a lifetime. Continuing through middle and high school, we can support and nurture students during their formative years and increase the depth of their skills that can provide a pathway to attending one of the 400 plus colleges and universities within the United States that offer degrees in game design. Providing opportunities to attend these academic institutions, including need-based financial support, is also a critical component to helping end generational cycles of inequality. And while pursuing their creative and technical degrees, students can learn firsthand from industry leaders that share their experience, acumen, and passion through one-on-one mentoring and internships at our organization. Together, if our industry can execute this continuum, we will have invested meaningfully in the lives of the youth from these communities for more than a decade before they begin their professional journey. Diversity and inclusion make us a better industry for today, and most importantly, for tomorrow. It allows us to make better entertainment experiences that are authentic, culturally relevant, and reflective of the audiences that enjoy them. Today, we have brought together a few of our important partners who will share their organization's mission and role in this endeavor, as well as their insights on how we as an industry can continue to take these important steps together for the future. We hope that you find their work as inspiring as we do. It is now my pleasure to turn things over to my colleague, Tony Lagans, Director of Diversity and Inclusion for 2K, who will be the moderator for today's discussion.
Thanks, Alan. It's my pleasure to be your moderator for today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce my esteemed panelists today. We're going to start off with Jim Huntley. Jim Huntley is currently the professor and head of marketing at USC. Jim is a faculty advisor, and he's an executive producer for USC Games Expo and a co-founding partner of PAC-U Gaming. Next, we have Susanna Pollock. Susanna is the president of Games for Change, which is a nonprofit that empowers game creators and social innovators to drive real-world impact through games and immersive media. Next to Susanna, we have Gordon Bellamy. Gordon is a professor of practice of cinematographic arts at USC. He is also the head of USC Bridge Incubator, which is a program that helps to cultivate the next generation of leaders in the video game industry. And last, next to Gordon, we have Layla Shabir. Layla is the founder of Girls Make Games, which offers a series of summer camps, workshops, and game jams designed to inspire the next generation of designers, creators, and engineers. Welcome to all of you, great panelists, and thank you so much for joining our important discussion today. Now, I'd like to dive right in here, and Jim, I'm gonna start with you. In Alan's opening, he mentioned something that was so important, and it was really just talking about the increasing role that diversity, equity, and inclusion it is playing in the video game industry today. So before we get into the big concepts that we're talking about here, let's just break some things down for our viewers. Jim, can you help us understand and talk about equity and diversity and why it's so important in the conversation about the video game industry today?
Absolutely. Equity and diversity has been a challenge for the gaming industry since its inception. It hasn't really changed very, very much over time, but I think the biggest change that people are seeing in the last 2 to 3 years are the lack of it in the modern era and the rationale that there's no excuse behind not having better equity and diversity in the industry from here on out. So what I like about working with companies like Take-Two and some other companies that have reached out to me about an initiative we started to call the Gerald A. Lawson Endowment Fund is that companies are now looking to invest in getting more diversity in their ranks and getting more stories told from different points of view.
I appreciate that. That's great conversation there. So let's talk about just kind of the inequities and why is it so important to have these conversations. Let's talk about that whole aspect and just getting people in the right mindset to understand what's available for them as majors in this industry. Jim, just talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So a lot of what we've been focusing on from a USC Games perspective is making sure that students of color, Black and Indigenous students in particular, because they have the least amount of representation within our industry out of all the various demographic groups. We've been focusing on scholarships, but the challenge that we have, and I think the challenge that society and the industry has, is it starts earlier than that. There's a phrase from, I can't remember who to attribute it to, but there's a phrase that he used that I remember saying, the inequities of our past pay dividends into the future. And that sticks with me because the reality is if you don't have a great opportunity or access to computer science labs and specialized education in grade school and high school and junior high school, the odds of you having a great portfolio piece when it comes time to apply to a program like ours puts you at a deficit. And if that deficit keeps rolling on into the future, generation after generation, the gap between the ability to get into some of these slots in game design and not being able to get them gets wider and wider. So we need to do a better job as a society, and we are willing to do our part and help work with companies like Take-Two to lead the vanguard on how do we get students some opportunity from grade school? Like, how do we make sure they can see this as an option? Because when I, as a Black man, get in front of a small group of grade school students, and I say I work in the video game industry, you can see the eyes just their minds explode because they've never seen anyone like me and the videos they see on YouTube or other visitors to their classes and to their seminars. So it's important to show that we have a presence here, but it's also important to make sure that the students who look like us, who are 20 years, 30 years, 40 years behind us, also have the opportunities that we didn't in some cases to get a job in this industry.
Yes, thank you so much for your insights. So important there. Susanna, that really kind of speaks to a lot of the great work that you're doing in helping to reach this underserved community. Can you talk about the work that Games for Change is doing?
Sure. Our mission, as you said earlier, is to empower game designers and social innovators, right? To use games for social change. And we see our work with younger people as really inspiring the next generation, right? And so just what Jim was saying, like we're going as young as sixth grade, sometimes fifth grade, but trying to give young people, and mostly in Title I schools, so those are schools that qualify for free lunches, which often are representing the underserved communities, an opportunity to dive in deeply into this gaming industry, this experience they all love to do, and help them become creators of this content, not just consumers. And we've been finding that it's a program that we've been running called the Games for Change Student Challenge. We've been running it for the past 6 years. We've reached over 30,000 young people in middle and high school. And we not only give them an opportunity to learn how to make games, but we also combine that with civic engagement. So they have to think about how games can help make their communities better. So right from the start, we want to empower them to think about this really important medium, not only as something they love to do, but they actually can make. They're learning important 21st century and STEM skills that can help them regardless of what career path. But what we really hope to see happen is that they see a future for themselves and they see an opportunity, a pathway for them. And part of our program, an important part of it, is this idea of mentoring, and mentoring from near peers and also from people from the community. So as Jim says, it's so important they see themselves in the people that are coming to speak to them. So when we're in Los Angeles, for example, we can reach out to USC Games for game design students to come and speak to the kids, that we can bring people in from Riot or Activision or from Take-Two to come in and say, yes, this is what I do, and this is something for you. And we do the same thing in New York and working in Atlanta and Detroit. And I can tell you that students are coming back year on year, and we're seeing them use this program as like their college essay, or they're building their portfolio. And I love the idea that, if we can we can get to them at a young age. They spend their summers with Layla at Girls Make Games, and then they can go on and apply to college, and we were talking about this pipeline or this pathway for them. And so that's that role and what we hope to inspire.
I love what you said there, Suzanne. There's so many little nuggets that you just pulled out there. The different avenues you can have and career pathways there are in the gaming industry. Just the activity that you can have in terms of having mentorship and role models and representation, and just, having good gamers out there. So there's so many things that you talked about that I want to hit on. Let's just pull Layla into this conversation and just talk about the idea of mentorship and representation. Layla, talk about the workshops and the summer programs that you offer to girls. How does that help to increase the representation and the mentorship aspects that we've talked about?
Thanks so much for having me. I was on mute. This is 2021, still going on mute. But like Susanna said, I think it's really important to kind of pass that baton on. And I think we see this summer after summer, having created a place that's, for girls. We get this question a lot. Why do you need a space that's just for girls? There's so many programs out there that are open to everyone. But I think it's just so important to create that space because, like Jim talked about, it's so important to see people who are like yourselves. For many of the girls that come to camp, this is their first time walking into a room full of girls who love video games. They've been so accustomed to kind of being the only girl on their robotics team, or the only girl that went to a coding camp with their brother, and the girl who's fighting her brothers for the Xbox controller. So those are very common themes and stories, and I think it's important to kind of tie in not just the mentorship, but also the community. It's very important to walk into a room and feel like you're not an outsider, and the best way to do that is to show many more faces that look just like you. It's really validating to walk away, not just with the technical skills, but to feel like these are people that I'm going to, kind of encounter in 10, 15 years, and we'll be like professionals, because right now we're just kids making games, but we'll be professionals in a few years. And 7 years out for Girls Make Games, we're finally starting to see, these girls kind of make plans together to go to college. And this year, I would say, like, the first time we got in like dozens of emails from families saying, my daughter is now thinking of college, and how do we get this portfolio going? How do we set that up? So I think, touching on Jim's point too, there's so many challenges that, people have to go through just to get everything right. You shouldn't have to rely on luck so much. So if you look at the women who are now excelling and thriving in the industry, and you ask them their stories, so many things had to go right in their lives to finally end up in the industry. Many of whom ended up there accidentally, like me and even Tony. I think Tony and I touched on that earlier. But it shouldn't have to be luck or accident. We can actually intentionally create these pipelines. And I think it requires all of us working together, like everyone in this room, talking about what we're doing and how do we pass our students on from, we start as young as 8, getting them onto the programs and then passing them on to the student challenge and then on to USC and then finally on to the industry. I think that's basically the magic formula to solving the problem that we're talking about today.
Yes, thank you for hitting on that pipeline challenge and actually solution. You really clearly laid it out there for us. I really, really enjoy that. And something else you mentioned is just like really opening this world of gaming to new, diverse, a pool and a spectrum of gamers. And how do we create those real pathways back into the gaming industry? Gordon, you've done a lot of work in just helping to create value where value was not seen in places in the gaming industry, specifically for the gay gaming professionals. Can you talk about how the representation and widening the spectrum of what gaming professional looks like and how your company and your role really accomplishes that?
Sure. So we have a mission which is focused on education, employment, expertise, and entrepreneurship. And the reason why is because alongside diversity and equity inclusion, there's a new word that's come up a lot, which is belonging, yes. Right? A feeling of belonging, of being default. And I know that people in their uniqueness do a lot of mental, socioeconomic, and sometimes social gymnastics before they get to be as good as they are, before they get a chance to participate in this panel or participate in our industry by and large. And I think the work that we all share is trying to disrupt some of those mental gymnastics, socioeconomic gymnastics, social gymnastics that young women, people of color, indigenous people, neurodiverse people need to do in order to be as great as they are, to belong, in the space. And sort of hearing, what Layla's speaking to of a cohort, right, that treats each other as default, and where are we going to go now together collectively? The program, Jim's putting in place, right, with the endowment honoring Lawson, where there's going to be cohorts of Black and Indigenous people, right, growing together. And the work that Susanna, you've been doing since before it was cool, okay? You've been changing games, making that dollar out of 15 cents before all of us. All of that work, and with the support of corporations like Take-Two, right, is enabling us to move a generation forward. Specifically with GGP, we have a scholars program in partnership with Take-Two. Some go to USC, many go on to participate in Games for Change, and many have been girls who made games. And that's where we find ourselves intersecting, is at that college point of how do we take them towards professionalization? And then we hope to carry them through into employment, into being experts, right? Because that's the real challenge when you're trying to discover people. You don't want just to be entering, you want experts, right? And if things are going to really change, like this discussion, you need owners, right? Layla, owner. Susanna, owner. Jim, owner. All of you, owners of facets of your business, right? That is where we become the batter, not the frosting, right? Where the change is, more than we can count, 2%, 3%, 1%. We aren't even the ones counting, right? We're still being counted, right? Until you're doing the counting, nothing has changed, right? I don't need to ask, how many young ladies are in Girls Make Games? You're like, all of them, right? And what is the gender balance of Games for Change? I didn't know, all of it, right? These sort of systemic changes, that is the work I think we all share. I think it's why we all made time today, right? I've been to every E3. I was a booth boy when I started, and I'm still here, right? 25, 26 years later, haven't missed one yet. So I hope that someone out there sees this and begins their path, right? And this is additive, that's why we're all here.
I appreciate that. Yes, exactly what you're saying. There's so much more that all of us can be doing. The accountability piece is really very important, Gordon. Thank you for bringing that up. I just want to lay this out there to all our panelists. What can corporations do to really set themselves up for success in the near future and grabbing this new talent, this talent out there that we need to capture to help us build better, more relevant, engaging video games? What can corporations do?
So I was thinking about this in particular as Gordon was talking about the scholarships that he puts forward. So having organizations, companies like Take-Two have to be visible to young people, not just because they're buying, they're downloading the games off of Xbox or PlayStation, but because they're there in front from the beginning. And so Take-Two has been part of our challenge since the beginning, offering scholarships to our grand prize winners. And I can tell you that that's a motivator for kids to participate, not just because there's a scholarship at the end, but it's because Take-Two is part of it. Like, it made us cool. Right. And I think it's that relationship at that young of an age that makes a connection for people. Is like, yeah, they want to hear what I have to say. Right. Like, they're here because this program exists and because I'm interested in doing it. And I think that kind of relationship with these kids, whether they're mentoring and coming into a classroom, they're volunteering at a game jam or judging games at the end of the competition, they're involved. And I think that it really has an impact on young kids' lives.
Yes, I love that.
I just want to add to what Susanna's saying. I think that, and something that, we're talking about Take-Two, and thank you for having us, is making the success of Black people, of women, of queer people, of indigenous people, neurodiverse people, a business goal. Plain and simple, the same way that the consumption, right, of content, right, get some downloadable skins, buy some NBA 2K, right, that's a business goal around which the business is aligned. And I feel as though if the expertise of women, Black people, neurodiverse, other populations was a business goal, then that would be the change. It'd be that simple. Like, oh, our business is more successful if there is more of this, right? And that's about people being of value versus just being valuable, which are two different things. There's lots of exceptional people, right, who are of value in spite of their circumstances. They're valuable, right? There's a difference between saying you're of value and that's a business goal in itself. And I think that's the real change, because it used to be, I mean, just real talk, it used to be about exceptionalism, right? And be like, oh, you're able to thrive under this duress, right? Isn't that cool? Versus, right, you are actually who we are, so we are going to cultivate you. That's who we are year round. That's what we look like, what we sound like, right? Who we are. Right. And so as the lever moves more towards that, right, the same way, like I have biases. I attended Harvard College, so I'm of value, right? There's value in that, right? I'm treated that way in some circles. If the same lens was put onto women, onto brown people, Black people, queer people, then there'd be no, as the kids say, no cap on the change that could take place.
Right. And that just speaks to being deliberate with our diversity, inclusion, equity practices. Corporations really have to take that accountability and, like you said, do what's right in that spectrum, in that conversation, looking at value from different sources and kind of recalibrating our minds to that. But like you guys have said, it takes time. It takes starting earlier in the pipeline. I love that you just call that out. What other things can corporations do that are just different than what we've been doing in the past, perhaps? What would you recommend?
I would even add to what Gordon just said. The looking at this challenge as a business challenge is key. That's what between the inspiration of the social justice marches from last summer and really talking to our chair, Danny Bilson, who said that, hey, if you were going to tackle this issue, this giant generational issue as a business problem, what would you do? And that flipped the light switch on for me. Well, of course, like any business problem, what are my challenges? I've got gaps in my supply chain, if you will. So how do I fill those gaps in my supply chain? And really working your way backwards in a way where you're putting objectives, strategies, and tactics in place to achieve those goals from a business perspective. You're going to see outcome when it's not just, hey, here's a check and good luck with charity X. It's going to be more of, okay, here's a check. This is what we're hoping to see. Let's measure along the way and see if we're seeing progress on that. And it's the measurement of progress and adjusting in real time based on the data that you're getting back. That's where you're going to meet. That's where you're going to see the gap start to close in a meaningful way and be able to point out to other people in the industry, like, hey, this is what we can all do together. What if we scale this effort up and really had an impact on society as a whole? That mindset is really going to be what changes the game.
So I like to think about it as like a pie. You know, when we think about from a corporate strategy, we always think about there's a piece of the pie and everyone gets a little piece of the pie. But I think the way we have to approach this is really, the pie is not a fixed size. I think by including more people, the pie gets bigger. So it's not a fixed size that we're trying to all get a piece of, but by including more people, you know, in the industry, by becoming creators of this medium, we actually expand the medium, expand it beyond just entertainment. And I think that speaks really heavily to me as a problem solver. Is like when I look at video games, it's such an underutilized tool for social change. And I think like that, I can see Susanna kind of has been on the forefront of that. And coming in as an outsider to the games industry, I was just kind of blown away that, oh my God, you can do so much. Like 9 out of 10 kids play video games. not 9 out of 10 boys, 9 out of 10 kids. We're talking about literally changing perceptions and inspiring and educating generation after generation. And yet that power rests in the hand of like a select few. And I think when you think about it, not just from a corporate responsibility, but as a social responsibility, like what are we putting out there for our kids to consume? I think we need to bring in pretty much everyone, anyone and everyone who's interested in building a future together in that. So between the pie and the corporate responsibility, I feel like there's a lot that gets lost. Like, I think there's a big dichotomy between these are people that are doing good and these are people that are self-serving, but it doesn't work like that. We have to work together, and everyone does kind of go between what's good for me and what's good for everyone, so.
Thank you for bringing that concept up, Layla. The codependency. We are all community members in this pipeline, and we have to be active, deliberate in our processes, in our systems, how we tackle this problem. Before we end this conversation, there's tons of questions that we have that we want to ask you. So I'm going to pause right now and give our esteemed questionnaires a chance to ask their questions that are top of mind related to our conversation today. So we're going to start it off with some questions from our other video game industry experts here. We've got Carrie, she's an executive producer from Private Division. We also have Vanetta, who's a director of talent acquisition with Take-Two, and Nir, he's the head of mobile for Take-Two. So go ahead and fire it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. The first question is for Layla, but certainly open to having the rest of our panelists answer the question. But at the beginning of your career, did you ever imagine being a leader within an industry that is predominantly male-dominated? And what is your advice for other young women that are interested in taking a similar path to where you are today?
Thank you, Juanetta. I don't think I really envisioned being in a male-dominated industry, although I did envision being in a male-dominated world, because I grew up in the Middle East and I was painfully aware of being a girl and how my life was going to turn out to be different from my male peers or my brothers or my cousins or any of that. I was fortunate that my parents were very supportive and they wanted me to pursue whatever dream I wanted. But I think having that mindset and coming from a world that was very much male-dominated already prepared me for, hey, whatever I end up doing, there's going to be more boys or men than me. I think the piece of advice that I would really give girls is to honestly not think about your gender when you think about what you want to pursue, because it's all about you specifically. You might end up liking things that people, even your age, your geographic location, your educational background, or your family might not have heard of or even thought of. And that is all the things that I ended up doing were things that didn't match anything that I had seen in my own environment, but I just kind of pursued what I wanted to. And then 2 is to kind of use a very selective hearing. I think you have to kind of develop selective hearing, listen to the people that care about you, that love you and encourage you in being more of who you are, and diminish the voices of people who say you can't do things because it's never been done, or that's not how it is, or that's not how the world works. The way the world works is based on the world that we build, and we're continually building a new world. So it doesn't matter how things are done now, they're going to be done a different way as you grow up, and you can be part of building that world. So those would be like my 2 pieces of advice for girls, is to just pursue what you want and, develop selective hearing.
All right. My question is for Susanna, but also open to anyone else who would like to answer. And I think Gordon kind of hit it earlier when he said that, most of us didn't have a lot of examples or opportunities. I'm in that boat. I didn't have any programs and anyone telling me that I could do this, and definitely had to, not necessarily an accident, but really had to work in a different way, harder than most. So, my question, Susanna, for you is, could you share an example of how your program has impacted someone that has participated, or, a few people?
Sure. So as I said, our program is 6 years old in New York City. We're a bit younger in the other cities that we're operating in, and there are opportunities now that kids all over the country can participate. But we saw in New York a very particularly strong cohort. We're actually in over 125 schools right now in New York City, and there are some rock star teachers that have encouraged their kids to participate, their participants year on year and year. And that to me is certainly the beginning of getting this kind of program off the ground, and particularly in schools where students usually aren't offered this kind of experience. So one, having the teachers find value and really and work to and making it a part of an annual program within their school system has also allowed students to continue with the program year on year. There's one young woman in particular who won, I think she won the our theme category the first time round when she participated as a sophomore. The junior year, she won again. And by the senior year, she was a grand prize winner in New York City. And I hear that she then followed on with a full scholarship to NYU Game Center. Right. And it was just amazing. And I just remember she was invited to speak at the Games for Change Festival after she won. It must have been the second year. I don't think it was the third year. And she came and we were having a conversation about, the program, and she was invited to speak on it. And her father came with her and followed her around the entire 2 days she was there with a camera recording her experience in this, professional environment, not only when she was speaking, but when she was sitting and watching the other people on stage. And it was so awesome to see that kind of support within her family. And I'm like, all right, you've got educators supporting this young woman, this pathway. You've got her family. And actually, since she graduated, I've seen other kids in her family come through the program. But it takes that kind of multiple supports from different directions to really support this young woman who is a woman of color from Brooklyn, who found her path, right? And she got the right supports, and she got there. And now I also understand that she's launched her own studio and is raising money, on Kickstarter. She's remarkable.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that story. That's so cool.
Nir, do you have a question for our panelists?
Yeah, hi, I do. So my question is to Gordon. I'm looking at LGBTQ representation in gaming. I've been in gaming for more than 12 years, and it feels to me that representation is a bit low than what you would expect, what I see in tech in other sectors. Do you have some data or some thoughts about that? Is that the fair estimation? And if so, why is that? And what are the main challenges that LGBTQ individuals face in this industry?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you a little history here. So when we started GGP about 15 years ago, which is not that long ago in corporate times, queer people only existed on an anonymous mailing list, anonymous to each other.
That's
okay. Because employment safety, which is still a concern globally, not to mention just safety, was a #1 concern which all of us lived with. So, even back then, weird flex, but I had designed Madden Football, had already sold a company to Activision, employment safety. So that is the #1 reason why. And just in this new recent history, have we begun to build the trust and value in each other so as to aggregate and to even acknowledge each other, okay? And to build systemic ties to companies like Take-Two and others to move from hiding from the industry, right? Escaping from the industry, to affinity, right? Right? To employee resource groups and corporate leaders like Tony existing, right? and we're moving closer to being a business resource. And so in other technology areas, that path is further along, where it is like to say in the batter that the queer identity is of value, and there's customers, there's of course creators, there's of course business leaders and owners, of all walks. And in the optimum business, you would cultivate, all types of people. As a game craft, we are still in generation one. You even asking this question here, you are a wild pioneer. You are the out there with your machete chopping down bamboo to even ask this question, which presumes that LGBT people would be employed, okay, and then in communication with each other, right? In communication with each other across different companies, and in any sort of ongoing concern. So welcome. Thank you for asking. For those of you at home, we have a Discord and a Facebook that you can all join and participate at any time, or you can reach out to me directly on Twitter, Gordon Bellamy. Wherever you may be on or off your path as an LGBTQIA person or an ally, right? Because I think that's something we've all discovered. And I think whatever population you are part of, whether it be across gender or race or expression identity, is that you don't have to be a member to care, okay? You don't gotta be a member to say this is an important issue. And in fact, a lot of the work that we do at a corporate level is saying, hey, you don't have to do all the work, right? You know how to push the rock that's sitting on you. We're gonna help you push that rock that's on you. It's not on me, but I can help push, right? Because I can see it. It's on you. And so asking these questions, corporate support, time, right? 3 T's, time, talent, and treasure, will move this discussion forward. I hope that answers your question there, but otherwise just get at me. I can, tell you more. And anyone else there who's watching, we can tell you more in greater detail.
Gordon, I know your company has some things going on in the few months.
Oh,
Can you talk about some of the activities you guys have?
Sure. So we have most of our content now, in addition to our Scholars Program and our community service that we do with Take-Two, is streaming. So we stream front page of Twitch and we bring it to YouTube, content around equity, inclusion, belonging. And not just LGBT, we just had our second Indigenous Game Creators panel yesterday. Big hit, because you know what? Indigenous creation has always been here. In August, we're going to be doing our first GGP Honors, which is going to be honoring the best in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in our craft. So we're going to be lifting up the people who do the work, right? Every day in our ERGs, in our executive suites, like Dr. Liggins, right? These people need to be cultivated as well, right? The same way that we cultivate engineers, artists, and other things that we value, right? Things that we value need to be cultivated. So we're going to be getting to do that work August. Tune in, front page of Twitch. It's going to be a mood. Hope you're all there.
Awesome. Thank you. We probably have time for one more question, so let's go for it. Who's got their last burning question for our panelists?
Oh, I have several questions.
Burn.
It's one, we'll just speak. I have to come from the affinity group, ERG, BRG perspective. So Gordon, thank you for touching on that. So this question is for both Jim and Gordon, as someone that represents a member of an ERG as well as a leader of an ERG. What advice would you give ERGs, affinity groups, BRGs that are either just starting out or those that are established in organizations that are looking for ways to further embed themselves into the business, so that batter versus the icing that you're talking about?
Also, to add to that, I think the something that a few of us have touched on earlier is an old adage from the business world: you can't manage what you can't measure. If you don't have a way to see how your progress is evolving over a continuum, you're kind of just going, well, I think something's working, let's just keep doing that. And business people, myself being one of them, don't respond well to that. It's just okay, let's just keep investing in a thing that I don't know the results of. You need to be able to go back and say, hey, this year we were here, this following year we were here. Here's the, not only have we seen a positive impact on the investment or good ROI, but we also recognize the fact that the partner and partners that we're working with are making moves and making investments into the future that they're saying that they want to see. The positive feedback loop of being able to say, here's data that shows that what we're doing is having an impact on our objectives, and rewarding that partner or those partners for that investment and for that support. That's really key to building a positive feedback loop around investing in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, what Jim said, but I'd still say make it mobile. God, if you could move that needle like 0.2%, anything, you can't get cut. You can't get cut then, right? There's no way, if the budget's tight when you're moving that needle 0.2%, right?
No, the scale at which we all operate, it's pretty staggering when you think about it. When you aggregate how much revenue and profit goes and gross profit goes in the games business, for a meaningful moving of the needle of DEI, comparatively speaking, it's not a huge amount of money. It's, to have a really big demonstrable impact, measurable impact. If we aggregate our dollars and really focus on some key objectives, we can really move the needle in a way that's going to, frankly, when you start seeing things work, people get excited. It worked. Let's keep doing it. Let's keep doing it. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's why the Lawson Fund is what it is. It's an endowment because we want to see it have an impact in the aggregate over time, over generations, and support students for decades to come. Not just have it be this fiscal year, what can we do?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
One more thing, just to let it go, is just keep saying Black out loud. Right? Let's get back to Black is beautiful. We've been residing in Black Lives Matter for a long time, and we need to be back to like Black and proud and Black and beautiful. And so your existence, right? And saying it and saying positive outcomes after the word Black is meaningful each and every day that you can do it in your ERG.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you.
Good question. We've got time for more. What else do we have?
All right, I'll go if we have time for more. Layla, how have you been able to actually connect with the people in the community to bring awareness for your programs? Like, how do you actually gather people, to participate, and especially like in the very beginning?
Oh my gosh. So the first camp in 2014, we literally barged into a maker fair with flyers, and we were just going around and being like, you look like you would love video games because you're playing with robots right now. So come to our camp. But I think it's pretty much primarily been word of mouth originally, but then when we ended up partnering with the game studios and game companies, that really helped elevate the program and the PR. I think Susanna touched on that. It's like it actually legitimized us and then kind of made us really cool. Like, hey, you can go make games at these game studios. You can actually make a game at Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, Take-Two. You can go into their offices, meet the developers, and make these games. And I think that cool factor has kind of really helped us out. When it comes to speakers and people who want to mentor and be involved, that's been a lot easier because, a lot of our teachers end up being college students themselves, and they come back and they'll say things like, I wish this program existed when I was younger. It sucks I couldn't go to it, but at least I get to be a part of it and give back to the kids. And then same thing for mentors and speakers. There's so much interest in wanting to give back and wanting to welcome new voices into the industry. We haven't really had to do a lot of pushing. In fact, we get pulled in a lot of directions. I was talking to my team the other day. I was like, this is a very fortunate problem to have where we're getting pulled in 100 directions because we're needed in 100 directions, as opposed to us telling people that, hey, this is important, pay attention, and, look at what we're doing. So I would say it's been very organic, and really the tide is turning. We're building a new industry. We're building on the industry that we have, but we're also building a new part of the industry together. So it's really exciting.
Thank you. Thanks, Layla. And thank you to our panelists. You guys have been very inspirational, very thought-provoking, and have left us with a lot of great tidbits to take away, to take back to our corporations and our respective organizations to really make a deliberate impact in our community that we're building and this whole world of diversity and equity and inclusion in the video game industry. So thank you all. Thank you, the viewers, for joining, and have fun at the virtual E3 conference.
I think ever since Mega Man X, I've just loved